This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Alina. We both lost babies to SIDS in winter 2021.
In the throes of grief, I reached out to a stranger on the internet and our friendship was born.
In the years since, we've been working hard to survive, rebuild, and navigate the continual challenges that have come our way, including divorce,
Job loss,
dating while bereaved,
moving multiple times,
health scares,
pregnancy and parenting a living child,
starting new jobs, and so much more.
We are tired.
Happily ever after is out of the question for us, but this podcast documents our journeys to happier ever after because we believe life after loss is worth living.
So join us as we laugh, cry until we laugh.
Welcome to As Long as I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to As Long as I'm Living podcast. This is Alina here. I think this is my first time ever putting a trigger warning on an episode, but I am putting the biggest ever trigger warning on this episode. Today, we are talking to paramedic and autopsy technician Ephina and deputy coroner Caroline about infant autopsy, about infant death investigation. This episode is not for everyone. Like, I'm going to say that explicitly. It is not for everyone. We talk really frankly about dead bodies. Unfortunately, Judith and I are both intimately acquainted with dead bodies, with our son's dead bodies. Like as an example of something we talk about, I refer to Quinn or, his body as super dead. And I talk about what that means, like what it looked and felt like. If that's something that horrifies you to think about, I'm really going to encourage you to skip this episode. Like seriously, we talk about removing the organs. We talk about, like I said, what dead bodies look like, doll reenactments, like body lividity, like really gruesome, gory stuff that is so fucking fascinating to both Judith and myself. We were on the edge of our seats in this call. Like I've edited this down to a 40-minute episode, but we talked for over 2 hours with Ephina and Caroline, who are, by the way, so lovely. We completely forgot to do an introduction. So I'm just saying this right now. This is Ephina and Caroline. We were so happy to have them. Please listen to this episode only if you feel up for it. And if this interests you, we are not offended. If this does not interest you like it does us, please just skip this one. And remember, you can always start this episode and then skip it. On a personal note for our families, I think both Judith and I feel like this one's probably not for you guys. You were there the day of the deaths. You were there for a lot of what we talk about in this episode, and we don't want to re-traumatize you. But, listen at your own risk. And like I said, this episode was so interesting and in a bizarre way, like really healing. We had a lot of questions answered that we thought we were never going to get answered. So thank you to Ephina and Caroline. I have a ton more content from them that I think I might release as a bonus episode. So keep an eye out for that. We'll put a content warning on that one as well. And with that, I am going to send you into the episode. These are the last responders, Ephina and Caroline.
Hello. Hi, both of you. It's so nice to meet you.
Hello.
I have like a terrible glare coming down from I'm in like a random room.
No worries.
Caroline's on vacation.
Hot Mess Express. We are not professional people. We are.
That's good.
I can't even tell you. We've recorded this from under like blankets in our bed. Like we're not all good. Well, it's such a pleasure to meet you guys. I just want to introduce myself. I don't even think
that's what I was going to do too. That's what I was going to do too, because you guys don't know us at all. We were just like random people from the internet who were like, hi, come on our podcast.
Yes.
Let's be friends. Come on the podcast. Yeah.
Exactly. I think this is a really good example of like, there's no, like if you don't ask, you don't get. And I kind of feel like because I just reached out on TikTok, I'm shocked that you responded and said, yes, I feel like I should go reach out to Taylor Swift or something. I feel like I need to shoot higher. Just reach out to all sorts of strangers on the internet.
You're putting me on a pedestal. That's not necessary. That's so funny.
But yeah, so the two of us, this podcast is our journeys with our own grief journey. So we each lost a baby to SIDS in winter of 2021. And the podcast is mainly about like our own individual grief journeys. We've also interviewed though experts in various fields, you know, adjacent to that. So we've interviewed, you know, SIDS experts, we've interviewed pediatricians, we've interviewed therapists, trauma therapists, and regular therapists, grief therapists, OBGYNs. And this episode, like, I'm not gonna lie, the two of us, like, the concept of what you both do for work is fascinating to us, and I don't know how much people are gonna, like, I don't know how much our listeners are gonna care about this, but like, I personally am like fascinated by this, and I cannot wait to talk to
it just depends on what kind of person you are. Like, I'm detail oriented. Like, even when really bad stuff happens, I need to know all the details. That's how I heal. I'm married to someone who heals by not healing, which I personally don't think is healthy. But he just deals with things by not dealing with them, and we talk about that. Like, we deal with things differently, and he, like, the thought of what I do. And Caroline and I have been friends for years, and so I talk about her a lot. The thought of what we do, he's just like completely put off by it. But it just, like, it depends on the person. I mean, it absolutely depends on the person.
And so that each of us, both of our sons have had infant autopsies, and that's definitely like where the focus of this conversation is about infant autopsies in particular. But like, I'm just kind of fascinated by what you do in general. So we really appreciate you guys coming on to talk to us.
Also, I saw a TikTok from you, Ephina, and remind me what your handle is.
Muerto Vivos Docent 127. So
we will link you in the description.
I wouldn't know how to spell that.
I may even have to look it up because I don't know how to. So the funny thing about the whole TikTok was my 17-year-old daughter came to me. She was 16 at the time, and she was like, "Hey, let's make a TikTok." And I was like, I didn't even have TikTok on my phone. So I didn't know anything about TikTok. So when I made it, like, the handle is Latin for the dead teach the living. And so I just made it like on a whim, never even expecting it to be as popular as it is. So I was like, I went and spoke to a forensic club, and they were like, "What's your TikTok?" I literally had to look it up, and they were like, "You're not legit." And I was like, "Listen, I've got like 500,000 followers. It's legit." But I would have picked something that I could spell had I known that it was going to do anything. And so I think people just like me because I'm like a little bit of a smart ass enough that it's like not disrespectful, but also makes it palatable to people who want to learn about what Caroline and I do. Like, I have TikTok, but I don't really watch TikToks because it's not healthy. I personally don't think it's healthy. Like, I put social media out there, but people send me videos constantly, and I don't, like, I rarely watch them because I feel like, one, I don't want to copy another artist. Like, I feel like that's your art and that's your intellectual property, and I don't want to copy it. So I want my content to be unique to me. And so I just don't want to be disrespectful to someone else and then someone be like, "You copied this." Like, are we going to say similar things? Of course, because we do similar jobs. But I don't watch. There's another big creator on that talks about autopsies, and I follow him because he requested to follow me, and I thought it was the right thing to do. But like, I just want to be me. I don't have time. Like, we
do
read
you get a lot of requests for podcast? Like, do people reach out to you just saying, "I lost my child"? Like,
surprisingly, yes. Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I talked to Caroline because she does all of like the paperwork, and she knows all the laws, and she's like the guy. And then I deal with the children in a different way, and she does, she goes to the scene and she deals with moms in person. And hopefully, like, when you're already in a bad situation and you're grieving loss of a child, like, you need someone to show up for you in a different kind of way. And Caroline and her husband was a deputy coroner before he went to training. And they just show up for people beautifully.
And
yes.
You're going to have to, the first question that I'm going to have for you is like, you're going to have to explain to me how it all works. Like, what is a coroner? I don't know anything about this.
Right.
I don't
from
fully
the time the person dies
to when I finally get the autopsy report in the mail. Because it took me a year and a half. That's why
I'm punting that one to Caroline. I'm punting that one to Caroline.
I actually I will say I watched some of your TikToks just to prep for this. I mean, I had already seen a bunch of your TikToks, but I was watching some just now, and I love the way you refer to yourself like as a last responder. So like first responders, like paramedics, EMTs, and then you're like kind of the last responder, right? Like, you're like the last medical professional who sees a human being when, before they're buried or cremated. And I love the way that you put that, like the last responder. So like, talk to us about like, someone dies. What is the process like? Where do you guys come in?
Explain the process.
Because I know I will say, like, I personally get confused between like the mortician and the autopsy, and I know they're totally different, but like in my mind, they're like the same
and the
thing.
coroner
and I know they're
and the medical
not.
examiner. And then at some point, I was having this whole thing. I couldn't find the toxicology, so then they sent me to like some scientist, maybe. I don't know who does the toxicology report.
Forensic toxicologist.
Yeah. So okay. The baby dies. The person dies, not in a hospital, because I assume if it's in a hospital, you guys aren't involved.
So that's not always the case.
Oh, okay.
And I just want to say that, so I'm not representing the county that I work for when I'm saying
this. Of course.
So different jurisdictions do things differently. Certain states are medical examiner states. Certain states are coroner states. In the state of Indiana, where Ephina and I are from, it's a coroner state. So a coroner and deputy coroners have to have a certification to be able to be a medical legal death investigator. They have to keep a certain number of training hours every year to keep that certification up and go through that extensive training and then take, the exam to pass that and do that. That being said, I don't want to say every scene death, but like a death at a residence that's not attended by a physician, technically the coroner's office is supposed to respond to that scene. If someone's at home on hospice care, they're technically under the care of a doctor. So in our county where I work, because I'm the chief deputy coroner there, we have those cases still referred to us, and then we screen them. And I say, well, if this person's on hospice and it appears it's a natural death and there's nothing else at play here, like they didn't fall down the stairs, have an accident where they broke their neck, because then it changes it from a natural death to an accident. And in the state of Indiana, the coroner is the only one who can sign an accident. So we respond.
What's the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner?
So it's just a different state. So the medical
it's the same job.
Basically, except medical examiners have to be actual medical doctors.
Okay.
Coroners do not have to have a medical degree. But
so who calls you? Who calls the coroner?
So law enforcement, say a family finds their loved one deceased, they report it to the police. And Ephina, by all means, jump in here if there's also a deputy coroner. But family member finds their loved one deceased, they'll call law enforcement. Law enforcement goes, they are first responders. They respond, confirm, okay, yes, this person's deceased. And then they say, we need the coroner to make scene. Your question about if someone dies in a hospital, them not being a coroner's case, that's not true. It depends on the type of death and the circumstances surrounding it. So in the county I work for, we have it set up so that our major hospitals report every single death to us. And then our deputy coroners or whoever's on call after hours, or if it's during the day, they report it to the office. We screen those calls and say, yes, it needs to be a coroner's case, or no, it does not.
Well, and even so I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I'm also a paramedic. So what Caroline's talking about is someone continues the care. So, so let's say, since we're talking about infant deaths, so I get called 911 to the scene. Now I'm assuming care for that child. Someone has initiated emergency medical services to the house, and I come and then I take over care of the child. So if we work the child, which that means, try to save the infant, which I will say 99% of the time we always work the baby, because I also do mental health for public safety. And I feel like for you as a parent and for me as a paramedic, like I want to make sure that everything is done possible so that I can sleep at night. Like I'm going to have trouble anyways, but I want to make sure that I've done everything humanly possible for that child, for you, for everyone on scene, because it has been my experience in the past that I've shown up and I'm like, oh, well, this person's, super dead. And when I say
I'm laughing and like, this is like the most morbid conversation ever, but I have to tell you, like, my experience, my son was, and I can say this to you all, like, I don't know if I'll keep this in the podcast. He was super dead. Like, he was cold, rigid, like super, super dead. And they still did, like, we had $8,000 in medical bills for this, like, flat out, full on corpse. So like hearing you talk about it, the way you're talking about it is actually giving me a perspective that it makes me feel good about it. It's comforting. Because at the time it felt like a waste.
I'm
honestly,
speechless.
Yeah.
I'm speechless.
That doesn't happen, by the way. You guys don't know Judith, but that does not happen.
Buckle up, because you never met Caroline and I. You're going to be speechless.
So you're telling me?
Yeah, the majority of infant deaths or child deaths that we have are transported, regardless of if they are not exhibiting, signs of life when they are discovered. Yeah. They will try and work the child, and they will try and transport the child because they want to do everything they can to save,
So talk to me about the difference. Like, what would make you not do that? Because Judith, I know in your case, your son, so my son's name was Quinn, by the way, and Judith's son's name was Aiden. They did not transport Aiden, right, Judith?
But they did work on him. And I remember thinking when they put something up his nose, like they put like a string.
Did it look like a straw, but it was plastic?
Yes, they put that up his nose. And for a second, my brain, because I was obviously in shock, was thinking, oh, there's a chance. They wouldn't work on him if there was no chance.
Yeah. See, and that's kind of one of the things that we've tilted in EMS in the last probably 5 to 10 years. Is before it was do everything, and they realized that we were giving people false hopes. And so when I do things my way, every paramedic does it different. I read a lot on mental health, and I follow that much more closely than I probably should in a healthy manner. But like, I also say, listen, here's a situation, the attempt may not work.
Yeah.
Sometimes, in 20 years, I've been in EMS. Well, it's almost 20 years since 2004. And I can only think of one time in my entire career where I've gone or heard a story about people showing up and not working the child. And I used to be like, oh my God, that's so shitty. Like, how could you do that to the parents? But also, like, the older I get, like, false hope is not actually fair to you. And it's inhumane to make you believe, like, your brain's like trying to process what you actually see. And then first responders show up, and now they're, putting an IO in your child. And like, at what point do you say, listen, like, we cannot, like, there's just a line. And so when we show up, the things we look for are they stiff? Rigor mortis is set in.
Yes.
Do they have dependent lividity, which means the blood is pooling?
Yep.
Are they mortally wounded? Meaning, like, is their body intact? Like, I mean, you know that there are situations where kids are ripped apart or, abused to oblivion and their head is caved in. And that sounds harsh to say out loud to, like, the general public, but those are things that are unsurvivable. We say incompatible with life. And, when we show up, when I was young and I thought I could save everyone. And I believe that because that's what they tell you in school. Like, you are going to save lives, you're going to be a healthcare hero. And then the older I get, I was like, it's actually not true. Like, it's just, and it's not fair to you. So,
So then I want to talk to you too about this because you're saying you work with law enforcement. My understanding is your job, and maybe not exclusively, but a significant portion of what you do is investigating, was there a crime?
So we do not, my job as a chief deputy coroner or coroner is to determine cause and manner of death. Mm-hmm. So technically law enforcement, they're the ones who are going to investigate, was there a crime committed here and go after that end of it. Mm-hmm. I can do the autopsy and say, well, this is a homicide.
The skull was bashed in, so that probably didn't happen naturally.
And it's law enforcement's job to go and pursue that and all of those things. Right. So we work. Because
I'm thinking about when you're saying, as a paramedic, you come into the home and you want to do what you can for the child. Like, I know I was in the state I was in. I wasn't in an amazing mental health space, obviously. I was in shock and just crazed. But I remember saying, like, why are you doing all this? Like, he's dead. Mm-hmm. And there was a part of me that was starting to think to myself, because there was police and everything there, like, is it suspicious that I'm like, he's dead? Like, why are you doing this?
It feels offensive to you, but you have to keep in mind, like, our perspective is we speak for the dead.
Yeah.
So if you killed your child, you obviously wouldn't want us to know that. So our job is to go in and say, okay, well, we found a fracture in this baby's skull. What caused that fracture? Well, if it's explainable, it's explainable. Maybe the child had been in a car accident months before and it, or whatever the case may be. So it can come off as offensive because people are like, oh my God, I can't believe you won't let me touch my baby, and they get really upset. But at the end of the day, like, if you could take the emotions out of it and look at it, because we're coming in from a non-emotional standpoint. Like, our job is to come in and look at facts and evidence and speak for that child in case something foul happened to them.
And in hindsight, I can look at that and say that I really appreciate, as a parent, I'm glad someone was speaking on his behalf and looked into this on his behalf. And I'll actually add, for context for you both, an extended autopsy, not through the medical examiner, but through a nonprofit, actually found a gene potentially related to my son's death that I'm actually doing IVF to select out for future children. So like, I fully am supportive of all of this. I think my only thing is like, I think about the day of and how it could have maybe been handled better, but it sounds like there's a lot.
Say we have a homicide case and we respond to that scene and we don't treat every case as a homicide case first, we can't go back. It's just like evidence is lost. So that's how we have to approach every single scene. And then you kind of work backwards and roll things out, as Ephina was saying. It's one reason, like we do take hospital cases. Even some cases will accept that are fetal demise cases. So, baby was born, but did not have any heart tones or anything. Well, if mom's had 5 previous miscarriages, we want to try and help get answers for that mom, because we want to help her. So we do genetic testing through Mayo Clinic. We've done that several times, and identified things like you're talking about so that it's there and you can proceed accordingly so you don't have to go through that traumatic experience again. And I think one thing that it's like the hospital, sometimes we have struggles working with Ephina, as the maternity ward if there's a fetal demise or an infant death, because we of course want to accommodate everything for the mom to be able to keep their infant and stay with the child for as long as possible. But after 1 or 2 days, even sometimes 3 days, if they're not discharged and they want to keep that baby, it poses challenges for us to be able to find those answers. And a lot of the time in that moment, they're not going to understand or see. But later down the road, like you're saying, they're very grateful because we are able to find answers a lot of the time. Sometimes, unfortunately, we can't. We will have a negative autopsy and we don't know what happened and we tried everything we can, but other times we can, and it can help save, future children or other children that you already have and stuff. So it's just, there's a lot of different factors going on that is not always evident when it's happening.
I want to go back to you get the phone call. Okay. You get alerted from the emergency system and you go to the house. Okay. And your job there is to collect the body. What is your job?
So we have to preserve the scene first and foremost. So law enforcement will ask them to, and like, I guess what I can compare it to, like if it's like, we're specifically talking about infant death, but say it was like not an infant death and it's like a suspected suicide or something like that. Like don't move the gun, leave the body exactly where it's at. Technically no one's supposed to touch the body except for the coroner when they arrive. So in the same situation now, because of the way, like Ephina, she's a paramedic and she, how we're talking about how 95% of the time or whatever we can throw out there, infants are worked. Okay. So there's going to be, I've had cases where I've responded and that child is in the ambulance because they've taken the child, tried to work the child. And then they realize in the ambulance, this isn't going to go anywhere. So they don't transport. So when I get on scene, it's all a matter of, okay, let's keep everything exactly how it is. We do doll reenactments, which at the time it can be very traumatic.
Yes, I recall the doll reenactment.
So helpful. So helpful. Even in the review teams. I mean, if we don't have a doll reenactment, it's a challenge to kind of go back. So sometimes we'll come and we'll do the doll reenactment later. It just depends. But we need to know exactly how that infant was found. Exactly how the infant was laid down to go to bed. I mean, there's just so many factors. We have a form for 12 months and under that we fill out. It's called a SUDI form.
Oh, yes, those questions. I recall the questions. Yeah. I know the questions. What time did they eat? Were they born before this many weeks? Did you breastfeed? Where did you find them? When did you last see them? What time did they normally go to bed? What was their were they demeanor? Were they a fussy kid? I remember a lot.
And he falls. So when we get to the
Yeah.
scene, we basically preserve it first, and then we just kind of work from there. We want to document everything. And like I said before, law enforcement does their investigation. We do an independent one. So we have to do all of our own scene investigation as far as photographs, everything like that. There's just a lot that goes into it. And then once
we have to pause because I've got more questions. Pause.
Yeah,
quick question.
sure.
So at my crime scene, they brought
Your crime scene.
Oh, my crime scene.
They brought a car seat, which I thought was the most kind in that moment. I thought it was the most just loving, generous thing that they could have done. This idea that coroner, I think it was the coroner, or whoever it was, brought a car seat to take my son out and to take him to the wherever.
Wow.
I mean,
I love that.
Yes, and it was a car seat from like a long time ago. I could tell, like, it wasn't a new one, but it just meant so much to me because what would the idea that how would they have carried him out? I don't know.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense though, because then you feel like they're taking good care and
taking care of him.
What are some of the things that you do to treat? Do you treat an infant's body different than an adult's body? Like, are there things you do to like care for them? Like, I sometimes see like they'll keep the lights on at night or whatever, even though the baby's gone. Like,
so when I do the autopsies on babies, I carry them. I carry the babies just like a real baby.
You carry the baby out of the house.
Well, so I call them body snatchers, but they're actually like body removal specialists or some fancy term, I'm sure, but I call them the body snatchers. They're independent and they're a contractor that works with the coroner's office.
there's a job.
And I don't know, do they carry them out?
What are these jobs?
So not all counties have that though. In my county, we are very lucky to have it because I tell countless people this. I would not do my job if I had to be the one to remove, because we have decomp bodies, we have all sorts of bodies.
Yeah.
But exactly what Ephina's saying, we will wrap the baby in a sheet and carry the baby out. Even in the hospital and stuff, because it's just different. So
and once the baby's in the car, and please, if this is too much, don't answer.
No,
once the baby's in the car, where do you put it?
So we have just small cots, that we'll put the baby on, or
in the trunk.
No, so our transport company has a minivan. So in the back of the minivan, we have so they can put the baby in the back of the minivan.
A little bassinet.
It looks like an ambulance stretcher, like you see on TV. It looks like that. Only it's like one person can do it much easier than an ambulance.
Well, the car seat thing. I mean, there's not much that I remember that was done with like compassion and where I felt like someone was really thinking of me as the parent, and that was one thing where I felt seen, because you said like you have to be professional and you're the baby's voice, not my voice. But I think a lot about people who lost their children in hospitals, and I'm jealous of the compassion that they were treated with. I'm jealous with just like the tender, gentle care, the fact that their children got handprints and footprints and hair snippings, and that it's an environment that's very compassionate to death. And the environment that I had was a crime scene. It was not compassionate to death in the way.
I think from your perspective, I absolutely see that. I absolutely 100% see that. And I want to give you a little snippet of what goes on for us, because there's not one, me as a paramedic, me as a firefighter, me as an autopsy tech, and Caroline can absolutely 100% attest to this. There's not one baby that we go on that doesn't affect us. And I mean, I do peer support, and I talk to police officers, firefighters from every county that surrounds mine. And there's never an infant death that doesn't involve, in our area anyways, a psychologist and a debriefing, or the first responders have to go meet with her and at least check in and say, I'm okay, or I'm not okay. And it gives them the opportunity to seek additional mental health help for themselves, because there's never been a baby ever that did not affect us in a totally different way than an adult. And I mean, we have adult cases that really stick with you. They're usually like the more graphic, or, and
there was such a brief second, but it really stayed with me. And I understand from where any professional is sitting, it's your job. Like, you're looking at it like a job, you have to be professional. And then when you go home, you have the privacy to express that. And I completely get it, but I would love to know, if you can tell, and this is such a dumb question, but you can tell I'm a grieving
No
mother because I'm
questions
going
are
to ask
dumb.
it.
No, we're literally like the most laid back
This
people.
is
You're
for
not
some
gonna.
reason, like this really mattered to me. So I'm going to ask it anyway, because I know
Yeah.
our listeners are going to care also. But like,
Yeah.
can you tell the baby was loved? Like, can you tell that we picked that sheet and that we fed that bottle and that we cared about the angle and that we took a billion pictures? And can you tell that we had the right foods in the thing and the right toys and the all those hours that went into planning like just this one perfect magic? It felt like I was treated, because it was a crime scene, like a criminal. But can you tell the difference between my home and a criminal?
Oh yeah.
Well, so what Ephina was saying, as far as like the way that we're trained to be like cold or, you know, be just in a certain mindset in that second that we respond to that scene. There's absolutely a difference when you walk in a house and you see the way that something is compared to another house where you walk in and you get a feeling where it's like, and I don't know that I want to necessarily say a parent didn't love their child, because like I have a master's degree.
Every parent loves their child.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
so
most.
yeah. So if some parent has a horrible upbringing and that's all they know, they're, you know, taking care of their child a certain way. I don't want to say that I can tell that they didn't love their child, but I can definitely tell the level of care that they were taking care of their child, if that makes sense.
And I have read my son's police report. I was able to get a copy of it once finally 2 full years later the case was closed. I was able to get a copy of it and I read it, and it said things like, you know, a child had preventative diaper cream, even though he didn't have diaper rash. And there were no blankets in the crib, and he had a sound machine, and there was like a list of like, you know, all of, you know, he had medicines that were, you know, had the right dropper sizes. And like they listed all of the stuff from the scene that in his everyday life, like to me just felt so normal. Like, of course he would have a humidifier. Of course he would have a stack of
My
books
son didn't have a
that we read
humidifier.
every night. Like,
what is this fancy kid you have?
Stuff. He had very dry skin, but all of this stuff. But I remember reading it, and although like I was able to read between the lines of the police report, and I could see what they were saying was this was a household where they were taking good care of this child. Like they didn't say like this is a household where they love their child and they couldn't have possibly killed him, but they were listing. I could see they were listing literally every single thing, and it felt so good to read just like this very explicit, like cold, you know, list of all the things I did that made me a good parent.
They're doing that because if they do find something where there was like a neglect of the child, all of these things are documented, and all of that's, you know, documentation that there was no neglect in the care of the child. Because if there is a crime that's found, and then it's going to go to the judicial system and go to court, and the prosecutor's office is going to take it up, all of those things, you know, need to be documented. So, and so that brings me back to, I don't know that we can say, you know, oh, I can tell that this parent really loved their child. But yes, if you see parents who are taking care of their children, it makes you go, okay, you know, they really cared about their child and they were doing the things to care for their child. Because I've walked into scenes where you open the refrigerator and it's literally just moldy. There's no food there, you know, like there's a lot of different extremes. So after you've worked so many cases, you can go in there and say, this feels normal. Yeah. This feels like they're cared for. You know, this does not feel like there's any kind of neglect or anything. And unfortunately, you know, like Judith, you're saying there's situations, you know, where there's just no explainable reason why your child died.
You know, I felt like I had a child at 20. I had just turned 20. I didn't know shit about being a parent. I didn't. I had a terrible upbringing. My dad was never around. My mom was extremely abusive. You know, I entered the court system at 16, went to juvie. So I had a whole lot of growing up to do in a really short amount of time. And luckily I had done that prior to getting pregnant. And I didn't know what I didn't know. Like I had no idea. And like and now in 2023, you have resources, right? But like when our parents were growing up, they did the best they could, and it was based off of what their parents did. And so depending on your location, your demographics, your socioeconomic status, like you take for granted what you know. And like you guys both have clean houses with nice things, but we see the houses that the mattresses are on the floor, or where 3 or 4 children are sharing one twin size bed and they're filthy. And, you know, there's like, just to paint a picture, like they may have dogs in the house and there's just feces all over the floor. So you don't really know that exists until you hear someone say, oh, it does exist. And even when I think I've seen it all, then you see something else and you're like, holy shit, I never even in my, like, I just sit around and play scenarios in my head constantly. And, you know, like Caroline said, it's pretty apparent. Like when you've seen the worst of the worst, like you go in and there's certain things you look for. Like she said, food, cleanliness. You know, when you say, who's your baby's doctor? And they have no answer. Sign, warning sign, like you should know. And
well, like even with unsafe sleep practices that you're saying, is that there are some families that don't know, and so, you know, they have this loss and they really may not know that their co-sleeping might have contributed to it. And you're in a place where you walk in and you can kind of tell that this person didn't know and it was an honest accident.
I had no idea when I had my first child. I was 21, and I'm surprised I did not kill her. Literally, I slept with her every single night.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
You had no idea. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like SIDS specifically, which my understanding is it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So you look and there's nothing there, right? So I remember, like, I think Quinn's autopsy, like it said the cause of death was like unexplained in manner undetermined or something, like that was so unsatisfactory. Can you talk a little bit about like what the process looks like when you have an infant that comes in?
You're skipped. They were in the van. Okay, they got in the van, and then after the van, they go to, I think you probably go to like a facility. I don't know. They go to a room that maybe looks like, in my head, it looks like an OR.
I'm really good at getting people off track because I love to talk.
So once we're done with our on-scene investigation and we have everything, you know, where it needs to be, and we check with law enforcement, make sure there's nothing else that because we work just basically side by side. We work really well with the detectives, the scene techs, and everything. Once everyone is at a point where, you know, we can then transport the child or the infant, we then take the child or the infant to our facility, where they do have to go into the cooler, you know, to keep the temperature down, because that slows down decomposition process. It does not stop it, but it slows it down. In the state of Indiana, technically we're supposed to do an autopsy within 24 hours if it's on an infant or a child. So we really try to meet that, you know, standard. That happens and we coordinate the autopsy.
I think the California coroner's office missed that memo. There was something missing in
the laws are all different, and all the
Massachusetts is 90. Massachusetts is 90 days. So I'm sitting here, I'm like, wow.
I had a TikTok follower say that they had her dad for 2 months, and he couldn't even be viewed because he was freezer burnt. And let me give you some perspective on that. So it's not that we're just like, oh, today we're not doing autopsies. In our state, in all states actually, they're grossly underserved in forensic pathologists, and it's because a lot of it's a hard sell. You know, when you go to medical school, you want to help the living, right? And so then someone's like, hey, why don't you go help the dead? That when you're young and a medical student, that's you're like, why would I want to do that? Me, now that I'm old and just peopled out, like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Trust me, I'm old and crusty, I know things. You know, so it's a hard sell for people. And once you go through medical school, whatever you specialize in, it's very difficult and time consuming financially and, you know, just to go back and do a different fellowship and go into forensic pathology. So,
and like you're saying, a different fellow, I mean, being forensic. So the county that I work for, we only use forensically certified pathologists. That's not a law. We don't have to do that, but we do because they have all that extra experience when they're doing homicide cases, infant cases, child deaths, all those things.
So you try within 24 hours.
Correct. Try. So what I'll do, yes. So my position, I actually do coordinate all of the autopsies and scheduling of everything. So if I know, like, a deputy texts me and the coroner and says, hey, I'm responding to a suspected infant death, I then am able to get the ball rolling and say, okay, we're going to need an autopsy on this 100% of the time. We do autopsies on those cases. So I then get a hold of the forensic pathologist, and we have one that travels from Dayton, Ohio, who's amazing. Well, two actually, they're partners. They travel from Dayton, Ohio, and the other one that we use travels from Indianapolis. So we have to coordinate that, and we try everything that we can to get it done within 24 hours. If that doesn't happen because of unforeseen circumstances, or they already have like court scheduled, we do it as soon as we can. But 9 times out of 10 homicide cases, child deaths, we try to do those within 24 hours.
So then they come. Okay, so now here we are. What do you call the room where the procedures are done?
That's the autopsy suite. And this is where
so you're in the autopsy suite, and and you basically, from my understanding, because I read the autopsy report, you take apart the body and weigh everything, make sure everything looks as it should be. I don't know.
Genetics, take labs,
genetics, get blood
samples.
I know you take slides of the brain. But you just take all these bits and pieces. You open them up and take everything out.
Yes, this is her area of expertise because she's
Ephina, please.
The right-hand man to our doctors.
So we keep the baby in a cooler. We bring them out. I carry them out just because I feel like that's what I want to do, and that's what you would want me to do. Like, it just seems really like distant to wheel them out on a cart. So I carry them in and we take pictures of them, before we do anything to the body. We always take pictures, and then we collect, if we have clothes, we collect the clothes. And if it's genuinely not a criminal case, we'll give the clothes back if they're not soiled. I see babies come in from the hospital with like their little hospital beanie caps on and their little wristbands. I'm careful with the wristbands. I put that stuff back, and it's all documented with the case. And then if the coroner's office is okay with it, that will be released to the family, because I feel like for me, I would want that if that was my baby. So I'm also very, very careful with that. Now, if the clothes are soiled or have blood on them, then no, that we don't want to, that's a biohazard situation. And that, if we can work with the family and make that work out okay, then we'll do it. But yes, like you said, we take the pictures, and then what we do is we remove each individual organ. That will give us clues. Like, the weights of these organs do give clues. Like, if the heart weighs too much, like, red flag. Why is that heart weigh so much? Is that a genetic issue? Is that, something, like, did they have something? They ingest something. We take toxicology samples with the blood, the urine, and then we also take the vitreous from the eyes. When the babies are really small, that's very difficult because there's just not enough vitreous in there. So sometimes vitreous and urine don't get taken, but we always get blood. So what is
vitreous?
So it's the water. It's called vitreous humor, which is just, it's water that's in your eye. It's like it's kind
tears.
Of
Got it.
Not tears. Tears are a little bit different, but it's on the inside of your eyeball that makes your eyeball inflate.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
And then on trauma cases, with kids or suspected, abuse or homicides, we'll take the eyes out. So that is difficult for some people to hear, but in the back of your eyes, like, have you ever been to the eye doctor and they put you up to that little machine where you have to put your chin on it and they like pop the air in your eye and they test the pressure? Well, there's also one where it goes and it takes a picture. It's like super bright. It's your retina, and there's little blood vessels back there. So kids that have been injured intentionally or, in a car accident.
Syndrome.
I was going to say shaken baby, I bet. Yep.
Shaken baby syndrome, big one, or abuse cases where there's violent trauma. Those capillaries will break. So we'll take the eyes out and we'll preserve them. And then, like, in a week or two, they'll cut those and they'll send them in for histology, and you'll see those capillaries. It's not usually visual. Like, most of the time you can't see that, like, with the naked eye. Sometimes you can. I had a case where you could see it and the doctor pointed it out, but most generally you can't see it.
But
fascinating.
That's what Judith, you were asking about, like, when they look under the microscope, I think you mentioned, like,
brain
we'll send
slides.
The brain.
Process it, and so they can look under the microscope and see.
Well, I know that because you guys work with Dr. Goldstein,
the Roberts program.
Because he had told me, it was this like research program out of Harvard, and he had told me that he said the coroner's job or the medical examiner's job is to find out if there's a crime. It's not their job to do medical research and like science research where they're, looking at massive amounts of data and looking at like the different, I don't know what, chemicals that make it up. Their job,
serotonin,
the serotonin levels. And he was like, so after they do their report, then they send us their slides to do further testing, to do genome sequencing, they do like other things. And so that's what he had told me. So that's kind of what
we send out so if we do histology, we send that out to an independent lab. When we do even toxicology, we send that out to an independent lab, and they run drug testing and all of those things. They run a toxicology panel. If we do like genetic testing, we'll send it out to Mayo Clinic, and they do a genetic panel. It can be a cardiac panel. It can be, whatever we're suspecting or looking at. Yeah. So there are those independent labs that we send that testing out to, because we don't do that testing in-house. Right. But that being said, when that testing comes back, it all comes back to us. We put all those pieces together and we do the final determination of cause and manner.
Yeah. So what Judith is talking about, the Roberts program is a SIDS specific research program. So it's like the autopsy is completed, the coroner's office signs off on their report, and then this is like an additional layer where they're like taking data longitudinally over decades. And that's actually where I found out about the gene I have. Potentially, because it's not the type of gene it's a variant of uncertain significance. And we're not sure if it's one that is necessarily correlated with SIDS, but because it's like questionable, like it came up on his screen, but it wouldn't necessarily come up on like, the standard coroner panel screen that you would look at for SIDS.
I kind of wonder if that's part of like a private, like the parent would elect in, because sometimes
it is. Yes, it is. We elected into it.
We elected
yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And we had to like
sign
it was fully like the state had to finish what they were doing. Like it was completely separate from the actual process that you're talking about.
And that's why we call it practicing medicine, because we keep practicing. And so those meta-analysis studies are really good because they do collect data from all over all walks of life, and they look at, and you two seem very like willing to participate. Not all parents are capable of that.
Yeah.
And so it's very important that, parents be advocate for their kids. And the problem is that you don't know that you're going to need to be an advocate for your kid unless you're in that situation. And it's very difficult to think clearly through those situations when you're grieving on top of everything else.
When your child has died, you're so out of it and you're not thinking logically. And it's such a blessing, I think, that we live in a country where there's such a system and process in place to take these next steps, to take these blood samples, to look into why someone died. Because I wouldn't have the fortitude in that moment to pursue that. Like to pursue those answers. And the fact that someone could preserve a moment in time. So when I was ready, the information was available to me, but it was only available to me because the coroners and the medical officer examiners and the police did such an excellent job at preserving that moment in time. So that's I really feel grateful for that.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow.
Yay!